Hello everyone, and especially to our advisor in this subject, Professor Palahang. Hello, sir. So my name is Rosalier V. Sanchez Jr., taking up Bachelor of Arts in History and currently studying at Mindanao State University, Marawi City. And now I'm currently residing in Bayanihan Village, Santa Elena, Iligan City, Lanao del Norte. So before we go on to our discussion, let us first discuss the basic concepts of diplomacy and the diplomacy of the Philippine history. Let us first discuss the diplomacy, how diplomacy works, and how diplomacy stands in the international relationships, and how the purpose of diplomacy. So, let us first discuss what is diplomacy. According to the National Geographic, diplomacy is the art and science of maintaining peaceful relationship between nations, groups, or individuals. Often, diplomacy refers to representatives of different groups discussing such issues as conflict, trade, the environment, technology, or security. Sabi nga nila, maganda yung pamaraan ng diplomacy because it maintain peaceful relationship between nations. It is art and science. Marami na rin sa haba ng pakikipag-ugnayan natin sa ibang bansa, marami na rin tayong natutunan at may mga palatuntunan na din tayo, mga pag-aaral tungkol sa diplomacy. Kaya it became science too. So, maintaining peaceful relationship between nations. Sa bansa, either China, America, and the Philippines, maintaining a strong relationship with that countries, or dalawang pangkat, or groups, or dalawang pangkat ng tao or individuals. So, yung magandang example nito, magandang example na kung nagamit na natin ang diplomacy, marami na ding beses na nagamit na natin ang diplomacy. Recently is yung issue sa Spratly Island. When the China trying to enter in that Spratly Island, in that territory, and that Spratly Island located in South China Sea, and China, they have planned to enter and to attack that territory. And of course, the Philippines, and especially our government, do not allow those countries to attack or to enter in that island because it's our territory and it's our resources. That's why dito natin makikita na yung diplomacy, how diplomacy stand in these issues. So, because of that, if we're trying to recall our history before, if may conflict, there are conflict, kung may conflict yung dalawang bansa, kunwari sa mga issues sa mga territorial boundaries, environment, or technologies like that. If we're trying to erase na wala ng diplomacy, if without diplomacy, and that issue is still hanggang ngayon meron pa, if walang diplomacy, I'm pretty sure ang daming affected. There's a lot of things will get affected. The government, the people, its constituents, marami. If walang diplomacy. Kaya nga yung purpose ng diplomacy dito is napaka-importante. It plays an integral role in solving conflict. So, nalagay pa doon sa definition ng National Geographic na often diplomacy refers to representative of different groups. So, meaning, every country will send representatives to the international to discuss such issues as conflict, discuss settle in a good approach in settlement and discussing issues, and at the same time maintaining peaceful relationship to those countries. There are issues, pero hindi naman gera agad. Hindi gera agad yung Pilipinas at saka yung China, gera agad because of that issue. That's why diplomacy stands in there. It is very imperative that diplomacy is very imperative in this kind of issues. Kaya, they will send representative to both countries. Hindi naman gera yung Pilipino tapos makikipaggera sa China. Hindi yon. That's why diplomacy is very useful. It is very important. We need to use diplomacy. And they will discuss issues. They're gonna, yun, the Philippines will send representative to the international, and the China also will send representative, ambassadors. They will discuss these issues. We didn't discuss nila doon aside from the conflict of the Sparte Island. Pwede i-discuss nila din doon yung climate change, or innovation of technology, or security of different countries, and also adapting techniques, how to improve the diplomacy, and how to improve individuals' relationship, and that is diplomacy. So in general, diplomacy of the Philippine history, it is maintaining peaceful relationship between nation groups or individuals. So how diplomacy in the Philippines stands in the international relationship. Best example for this is, for example, our OFW will send OFW to the other countries to work. Example, domestic helper. And we have connection to those embassy. May embassy tayo sila doon. And the Philippines, we have also ambassadors doon. We have diplomats. Those diplomats meaning those people who practice diplomacy. Yon, we will send sa embassy na yon. Tapos the rule of diplomacy and sending OFWs to the other countries is, for example, yung EFW may naranasan siyang mga hindi kaya-ayang mga karanasan or mga physical abuse. Of course, the diplomacy of the Philippines will stand for them to resolve para hindi na lumala. So that is diplomacy and the diplomacy of the Philippine history. There are also authors have their own definition about diplomacy, but at all, in general, they have the same meaning about diplomacy. So, and now let us discuss about the kinds of diplomacy. First is political diplomacy. So political diplomacy sets the global actors in motion to focus problems through dialogue and negotiation. It encourages the states to adopt techniques of resolving disputes through non-violence. Thus, political diplomacy contributes toward the stability of peace in the world. It helps promote states and people's faith in dialogue and not conflict or war. The positive elements of political diplomacy characterize it as a popular mode of international relationship. So we have a lot of relationship in political relationships in the other countries. However, if that specific countries experience difficulties in politics and political diplomacy, those representatives, they will discuss also, because there are countries who exercises the political diplomacy in different ways. For example, in that specific country here in the Philippines, we have a lack of ideas how to improve our political diplomacy. And of course, the other countries will let to adopt their techniques, how they exercise, how they execute that diplomacy. And of course, political diplomacy is often complicated in nature. and no single actor may be credited with its formulation. So political diplomacy focuses on problems through dialogue and negotiations. The Philippines, China, and Brunei, they have a negotiation, focusing on negotiation about problems and discussing about problems about politics, and it encourages the states to adopt the same exercise or execution of political diplomacy to adopt in different countries. For example, in if in America they exercise governance in good governance and good political diplomacy, and if they found that we have lacking something, we will adopt those techniques to improve our own political diplomacy. And of course, at this time, political diplomacy, of course, it promotes states and peoples. It contributes towards the stability of peace in the world. So, how good diplomacy stands for politica. So, that is political diplomacy. So, at this moment, let us explain what is military diplomacy from the word military. So, we're very known for that. So, military diplomacy can be defined as a set of activities carried out mainly by the representatives of the Defense Department as well as other state institutions aimed at pursuing the foreign policy interest of the state in the field of security and defense policy, and whose actions are based on the use of negotiations and other diplomatic instruments. So, this meaning differs military diplomacy from some other related phenomena such as gunboat diplomacy or coercive diplomacy. Military diplomacy, as such, performs several basic functions, which include the following. First is gathering and analyzing of informations on the armed forces and the security situation in the receiving state. Promotion of cooperation, communication, and mutual relationship between the armed forces of the sending and the receiving state. Organization of working visits of representative of the defense authorities and a peaceful stay of military units of the sending state in the receiving state. And number 4, support of business contracts with arms and military equipment between the sending and receiving state. And number 5, representation of the sending state and its armed forces at official ceremonies and other events in the receiving state. For example, security in the Philippines. We cannot deny that America is more advanced in when it comes to military, and they are advanced in technology. They are innovative, and they have high quality of standard, what we call standard, high quality of materials when it comes to military. And of course, the Philippines, hindi din naman tayo magpapahuli yung Pilipinas kahit yung Pilipinas hindi naman talaga magpapahuli in the international. And of course, military diplomacy, yung rule niya dito is to help not developing other countries to improve their military forces and to support and aside from that is to support businesses contracts with arms and military equipment between the sending and receiving state. So, for example, the Philippines, for example, if If possible, there is a World War 3 or World War 4. Hindi naman natin we did not pray for that. Of course, wala naman sigurong na tao or mga sino yung sinong taong yung gusto may World War 4 or World War 5. Wala naman sigurong gusto niyan. But we don't know what will happen. That's why military diplomacy stand for this. And Philippines, we have lack of materials, especially in the military forces. So those improving countries, they have lots of technologies which will use for war, for combating. Then, of course, that countries will allow to use and to contract within state. Yun yung purpose ng military diplomacy. And aside from that is the business also. And they will sending and representation of between the sending and the receiving state, and the armed forces, official ceremonies, and other events in the receiving state. That is the rule of military diplomacy. And gathering, analyzing of information on the armed forces and the security situations in the receiving state. For example, there are a lot of other countries man siguro, no? Like what happening in Israel. At saka yung ibang bansa. There are also countries who is not very developed, or is not developed countries. For example, other countries will trying to attack that country, especially if that country hindi siya na-recognize sa isang ibang country as improving pa siya. And sadly, because they don't have military diplomacy, madali lang silang sikupin. So that's the rule of military diplomacy. So at this time, let us explain what is economic diplomacy. So economic diplomacy defined is concerned with economic policy issues, work of delegation at standard setting organization such as World Trade Organization or WTO, or and economic diplomats also monitor and report on economic policies in foreign countries and give the home government advice on how to best influence them. Economic diplomacy employs economic resources, either as rewards or sanctions, in pursuit of a particular foreign policy objective. This is sometimes called economic statecraft. So at the same time, dito natin, for example, that specific country, mahina yung economy nila. And economic diplomacy expresses itself through various modes. So, one of them is foreign aid. It's often bound with strengths of political strategies, political compromises, and undersigned objectives, and may put the opposite party in tricky situations. For example, during the World War I, Japan and China, the World War I, Japan and China, and that history, when Japan and China, those histories sa kanilang war, marami talagang nadamay doon. Ang daming namatay. If we're going to go back the assassination of Japan sa China, grabe yung rape nila doon nangyayari. The people, their economy, sobrang damage sa economy nila doon. Then this is how economics stands for this. So those World Bank and aside from ECOSOC and UN and social council activities or economic UN economic, they stand for this. And IBRD, Bank, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD. So nagbibigay silang give birth to new to reconstruct those country para palaguin ulit. So, bali in short, papahiramin ng pera or ng pera or sa kagaya ng, for example, yung country na yon dahil sa isang war, napaka laki ng apekto nun. So, of course, sa mangyayari sa ganyan, for example, aside from war, here in the Philippines, sinalanta tayo ng bagyo. Hindi lang war, sinalanta tayo ng bagyo like Yolanda, Sindong, daming mga resources na naapektuhan nun. And of course, kung ang Pilipinas lang talaga nagre-resolve ng mga problema doon like bagyo, ang daming natamaan yun, daming mga Pilipino noon. That's why this economic stands for this. Binigyan ang Pilipinas ng pinahiram ng Pilipinas like sa bangko, International Bank, pinahiram sa monetary fund, pinahiram yung Pilipinas ng pera doon to reconstruct sa mga and to develop again sa mga bagay, sa mga things na nawasak, yung mga resources na nawasak, to give new birth, to develop again our economy. Kasi napakalaki yung epekto ng bagyo na yon. That's why I remember when I was grade 6, when I go home here in Iligan, my parents experienced Typhoon Sendong. I received mga gamit from UNICEF. And that is national monetary national funds yan UNICEF, ECOSOC, marami sila. Tapos from that is kung may military, kung lulusubin yung Pilipinas ng iba sa ibang bansa, tapos maraming maapektuhan din. So, papahiramin tayo ng international bank ng pera to slowly improve our economy. That is how economic stands for diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy. So let us define and explain what is cultural diplomacy. So the may best be described as a course of actions which are based on and utilize the exchange of ideas, values, traditions, and other aspects of culture or identity, whether to strengthen relationship, enhance socio-cultural cooperation, promote national interest, and beyond. Cultural diplomacy can be practiced by either the public sector, private sector, or civil society. Best example for this is our culture here in the Philippines. We exhibit our culture from the other countries, especially our dress. Best example for this is Imelda Marcos. Kahit saan siya pupunta, saan siya pupunta ng ibang bansa, he always wear Filipiniana. That's why he always wore Filipiniana in every meetings and every international discussions. He always wear Filipiniana because according to her, we should promote our culture to the other countries, and in order other countries will also attract to our culture. They will they will become amazed. So for example, for this is during the Miss Universe today, showing our cultures in different countries, national costumes, showing their exhibition of national costume, how unique we are, how creative we are as Filipinos, and we will show our creativity to the international stage. And of course, we already won our culture, especially though in many events. Aside from that, in sports, Dagilas Pilipinas, we always join in international competition. And the cultural tips for resolving conflicts resolving conflicts in the international stage. For example, like what happened in the Gilas Pilipinas and Australias, uh, nag-away sila. It's because of something or misunderstanding or about sa play. But what I like the cultural diplomacy stands for that issue is they resolve that conflict. But it happened. That's why hindi yun lumaki na away na yun because of this cultural diplomacy. We have this culture na tayong mga Pilipino, hindi naman talaga tayo mapapadaig sa ibang bansa. We fight. Right? Mapayad din naman din tayo eh. We fight for our rights. And of course, especially when we talk about competition, Filipinos are very competitive when it comes to sports. So may kasalanan din tayo at meron din naman kasalanan yung ibang bansa. Pero hindi yun lumaki. This is that cultural diplomacy stands for resolving conflicts when it comes to sports, when it comes to culture. So, and aside from that is when we being cooperative in the social cultural, we promote national interest and beyond. And cultural diplomacy can be practiced either the public sector and the international stage. We Filipinos, we have a lot of things and culture to offer to the other countries, and also other countries patronize us, and also other countries they become amazed of our culture. But we have also the other countries' culture. Meron din tayong na-adapt sa kanila, like Spanish. Marami tayong culture na-adapt sa Spanish dito sa Pilipinas. Lalo na sa pagluluto, culture din nila doon, tapos na-adapt natin. But we respect those culture and they respect our culture. That's why cultural diplomacy is very important in resolving this conflict between different cultures. We have diversity diverse culture in the Philippines. We have lots but those, especially, it's our culture na natin yung mga kulay natin. It's our culture, inheritance na natin. It's part of our culture. Our ethnicity, it's our culture. And sometimes Americans, they didn't appreciate we Filipinos, we appreciate white skin color. But you know what? Americans, they really appreciate brown skin color. We Filipino, we are moreno, and we adopt it into the Spaniards. And of course, we have lots of, we're beautiful. Not just the physical appearance, but inside. And you know what? Americans, they love our colors. And that is how they treat us, how they respect our culture. And this is cultural diplomacy stands for. Let us compare and contrast diplomacy and foreign policy. So first, diplomacy, as we defined a while ago, diplomacy is an art and science maintaining peaceful relationship between nation groups or individuals. Often, diplomacy sent representatives to the different nations. So, diplomacy, meaning it is the instrument through which is foreign policy is implemented. Meaning yung diplomacy yung instrument, tapos na implement din yung foreign policy. So, foreign policy is the rule-making body, while diplomacy is the rule application body. So, foreign policy is a substance, but diplomacy is a procedural. Foreign policy consists laid down strategies country uses in relating other country. So, like in diplomacy is in general it maintaining peaceful relationship, and it's in manner approach. It is continuing relationships with other countries. However, foreign policy is it becomes implemented because of diplomacy. So, meaning to say, foreign policy refers to the stance that a country adopts and the strategies for the promotion of its national interest in the world. And diplomacy, on the other hand, refers to the manner in which a country goes about in achieving its needs through negotiation with other countries. So, let us more define foreign policy. So, foreign policy is the collection of policies that determine Americans' relations with other nations and foreign entities. So, foreign policy, it unders diplomacy, military and security policy, international human rights policy, economic policies, and environmental policies. In some ways, sorry, in some ways, foreign policy is the essential public good. Everybody benefits from a policy that makes citizens and the world safer, and no individual, except for maybe a band style of supervillain, could pull it off by themselves. Like all government policy, foreign policy has goals. Of course, foreign policy is about providing security. Now, however, in addition to physical security, foreign policy encompasses transportation, energy, cybersecurity, food security. So we can see how foreign policy and economic policy are closely related. So they are closely related, economic policy and foreign policy, because it includes food security and cybersecurity and transportation security. So in diplomacy, in general of diplomacy, so meaning to say, diplomacy is the instrument, and then foreign policy is being implemented. Foreign policy is the rule making policy, and however the diplomacy is the main instrument. So that is the differences if we compare and contrast. 5 things that interest me in this subject. First is diplomacy. As I've always tell this, because diplomacy plays an integral role. It helps resolving conflicts in different nations. Kasi hindi naman talaga gusto natin ng war, di ba? Hindi naman, sino naman ang gusto yung war? We can settle this in good manners, and we can settle this at the same time i-maintain din yung peaceful relationship sa countries. Kasi ano yan walang ibang magtutulungan kundi yung country lang yung magtutulungan. That's the very first thing that I really like, that I learned in this topic. Next is that makes me interest. And next is yung economic diplomacy. Yung economic diplomacy kasi there are big organization that helps those improving countries, not developed countries. They give they extend, or they give no, not give, they allow those country na humiram ng pera para simula ng bago to improve their economy. That thing that makes the best thing na natutunan ko in this subject, tapos na napag-aralan ko. For example, dito sa Pilipinas, we cannot predict what will happen in the future. Maybe a war or a typhoon or different phenomena will happen. So of course, those countries will always there to extend their help and organization to help those countries to improve and to rebirth again in a new beginning and to develop their economy. And next, third one is the security policy under sa foreign policy. Kasi and food security. For example, we exchange business, lalo na sa trading, food security. So there are foods also that we from the other countries na pumupunta dito sa Philippines natin, and there are foods also na yung foods natin na pumupunta doon, or mga businesses natin na pumupunta din sa ibang bansa, but import and export. So however, there also an assurance na hindi mas lamang yung ibang bansa kaysa atin. So we have equal security and food security, equal lang especially sa transportation, especially if we travel around the world. We have security in transportation, and in energy. We have the same uses of energies. The cybersecurity, for example, hindi naman hinahayaan ng Pilipinas na to those Americans, they can send pornography here in the Philippines. So, by ano na yun may security talaga yung Pilipinas dyan at yung foreign policy. That's what I like. We are being we're being secured in any situation, in any policy, so we're being secure. That's what I like. So the fourth one is the military policy. So there are countries naman talaga na who are not very powerful when it comes to military. There are countries na want help from the other countries. So that's why it's military policy na they allow those powerful countries, they allow those countries who are not very powerful, and there are countries na or are not recognized by the other country because of these they are not yet civilized, but they help those countries, especially in the military forces, because sometimes marami ng mga territories mga terorismong umatake sa bansa, for example, and there are lack of materials to use, and they extend their help, and those militaries are always open to extend their help. That's what I like. And of the last one is what we call diplomats. I'll gonna hindi siya kasali sa questions, but I'll gonna explain it, and I'm gonna add this one. So diplomats are those people who practice diplomacy. So they will help cooperate, share their ideas and techniques to improve their expertise, to improve economy, to improve more about the business, to improve about techniques, how to develop. That's what I like. Diplomats. We can be diplomats. Diplomats. We can be called diplomats. Because if you exercise the diplomacy, and you can be called diplomats. So diplomats who are those people who use diplomacy. So yun, we should be always secure that things in cycle, whatever country it is, it always secure because of this diplomacy. So that's with all. Thank you.